The chain stretched across the gravel road like metallic fangs, blocking the only path to Sarah Mitchell's mountain cabin. Behind those barriers stood 3 HOA board members with satisfied smirks, certain they'd finally beaten the stubborn woman who'd refused to bow to their authority for 15 years. But what they didn't know, what none of them had bothered to check, was that Sarah didn't just own the cabin at the end of this winding mountain road. She owned every single inch of the road itself. And she was the morning mist clung to the pine trees like ghostly fingers as Sarah Mitchell's pickup truck rounded the final bend toward her family cabin. She'd made this drive 1,000 times over the past 15 years, every muscle memory guiding her along the narrow gravel road that snaked through the Colorado Rockies. The anticipation of a peaceful weekend always built in her chest as she approached the familiar wooden structure her grandfather had built with his own hands in 1962. But today, something was wrong. 50 yards from her cabin's driveway, a chain stretched across the road between 2 metal posts that hadn't been there last weekend. Attached to the center hung a laminated sign, "Road closed by order of Pine Ridge HOA. Unauthorized access prohibited." Sarah slammed on the brakes, her truck skidding to a stop mere feet from the barrier. For a moment, she sat frozen, staring at the audacious obstruction. Then fury flooded through her veins like liquid fire. "You've got to be kidding me." She threw the truck into park and stepped out, her boots crunching on the gravel. The morning air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of pine needles and mountain streams, a peace that now felt violated by the metal chain gleaming in the early sunlight. The sound of approaching footsteps made her turn. 3 figures emerged from the tree line, their expensive hiking gear and self-satisfied expressions marking them immediately as HOA board members. She recognized them all: Margaret Thornfield, the imperious board president with her silver hair pulled into a severe bun; Robert Kemper, the treasurer whose wife had complained about Sarah's rustic eyesore at every community meeting for the past 5 years; and David Walsh, the newest board member who'd moved from California 6 months ago and apparently thought he could remake the entire mountain community in his image. "Good morning, Sarah," Margaret called out, her voice dripping with false pleasantry. "I see you've discovered our little improvement project." "Improvement?" Sarah's voice was dangerously quiet. "You've blocked the road to my property." "Our road," David corrected, stepping forward with the confidence of someone who'd never been punched in the face but probably deserved it. "This is a private community road maintained by the Pine Ridge Homeowners Association." Sarah crossed her arms, feeling the familiar weight of the legal documents she kept in her truck's glove compartment. Documents these 3 idiots had clearly never bothered to examine. "Is that so? You've been in violation of community standards for 15 years," Margaret continued, consulting a tablet with the reverence of someone reading scripture. "Your property taxes are 6 months behind, your structure doesn't meet current building codes, and you've repeatedly ignored notices to update your cabin's exterior to match community aesthetics. The road stays closed until you comply," Robert added, his pale face flushed with the excitement of finally cornering his longtime nemesis. The board voted unanimously. Sarah looked at each of them in turn, noting their triumphant expressions, their confident postures. They thought they had her cornered. They thought 15 years of harassment and bureaucratic bullying had finally paid off. They had no idea what they'd just walked into. "You voted to block access to my property," Sarah said slowly, "using what you claim is your road." "That's correct," Margaret replied. "Community property for community benefit. Perhaps now you'll understand the importance of being a cooperative neighbor." Sarah walked closer to the chain, running her fingers along the cold metal. "And you're absolutely certain this is HOA property?" "Of course it is," David scoffed. "The road serves the entire Pine Ridge community. Individual property lines end at the cabin lots." "Interesting theory." Sarah pulled out her phone and made a show of checking the time. "It's 8:47 a.m. on a Saturday morning. That means the Jefferson County Clerk's office is closed, so I can't access the official records right now to settle this dispute." The 3 board members exchanged glances, clearly pleased that Sarah seemed to be acknowledging their authority. However, Sarah continued, her voice taking on a tone that made Margaret's smile falter slightly, "I happen to keep copies of certain important documents in my truck." documents I inherited along with this property when my grandfather died. She walked back to her pickup and opened the glove compartment, withdrawing a weathered manila envelope. The board members watched with growing unease as she pulled out several official-looking papers. "These are the original property deeds from 1962, Sarah announced, holding up the first document. "When my grandfather purchased this land from the federal government. Interesting reading, if you're into that sort of thing." "We don't have time for," David started, but Sarah cut him off. "Oh, but you do. See, you just made this my business by blocking my access. So now we are all going to take a little education break." She unfolded the deed with deliberate slowness. "According to this document, filed with Jefferson County and never amended, my grandfather, and now I own not just the cabin and its immediate lot, but also." She paused for dramatic effect, enjoying the way Robert's face was starting to lose color. "The exclusive easement and right-of-way for the entire road from State Highway 285 to my property. All 2.3 miles of it." The words hung in the mountain air like the blade of an executioner's axe. "That's impossible," Margaret sputtered. "The HOA has maintained this road for 15 years, yes. And I've been very gracious about letting you do it." Sarah refolded the deed and tucked it back into the envelope. "I've allowed community access, I've never charged tolls or restricted usage, and I've let your little HOA pretend they had authority over my private road." David's face had gone from confident to confused to something approaching panic. "Private road? But the community, we've invested thousands in maintenance. On my road. Without my permission, though I never complained because it benefited everyone." Sarah's smile was sharp as winter wind. "But apparently, you've mistaken my generosity for weakness." She walked back to the chain, her footsteps deliberately slow and measured. "This barrier is on my private property. You've trespassed to install it, and now you're using it to prevent the legal owner, me, from accessing her own land." "We can work this out," Robert said quickly, his earlier bravado evaporating. "There's no need for, oh, we are definitely going to work this out." Sarah pulled out her phone again. "I'm calling the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office to report trespassing, illegal road blockage, and harassment. Then I'm calling my attorney to discuss filing charges for intentional interference with property rights." Margaret stepped forward, her authoritative mask slipping to reveal genuine alarm. "Now Sarah, let's be reasonable. Sarah's voice cut through the morning air like a rifle shot. "You want to talk about reasonable? For 15 years, you people have harassed me about my grandfather's cabin. You've sent threatening letters, imposed fake fines, and made my life miserable every time I try to enjoy the property my family has owned for over 60 years. She gestured toward the chain. "But this isn't harassment anymore. This is a declaration of war." David held up his hands in what he probably thought was a calming gesture. "We can remove the barrier. We can discuss." "Oh, you'll remove it," Sarah interrupted. "But not because we are discussing anything. You'll remove it because it's blocking my road, and I'm done pretending you have any authority here." She turned her back on them and walked to her truck, retrieving a heavy pair of bolt cutters from the toolbox. The metallic click as she opened them echoed off the surrounding pines. "You can't," Margaret began. "Can't what?" "Remove an illegal obstruction from my own property." Sarah positioned the cutters around the chain's weakest link. "Watch me." The chain parted with a satisfying snap, falling to the gravel in 2 pieces. Sarah kicked the metal posts aside and walked back to her truck. "This isn't over," Margaret called after her, but her voice had lost all its earlier confidence. Sarah paused with her hand on the truck door. When she turned around, her expression was absolutely serene. "You're right. It's not over. In fact, it's just beginning." She climbed into her truck and drove through where the barrier had been, heading toward her cabin. But instead of continuing to her driveway, she stopped and got out again. The board members were still standing by the destroyed chain, arguing in hushed, frantic whispers. "Oh, one more thing," Sarah called out cheerfully. "I'll be posting no trespassing signs along my road on Monday morning. From now on, anyone who wants to use this road to access the Pine Ridge community will need my written permission." The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of Margaret Thornfield's tablet hitting the gravel. Sarah climbed back into her truck and drove the remaining distance to her cabin, already planning her next moves. Behind her, 3 HOA board members stood in the ruins. By Monday morning, Sarah's phone had been ringing non-stop for 36 hours. She sat on her cabin's front porch, coffee mug in one hand and a stack of freshly printed, "Private road, no trespassing, violators will be prosecuted" signs in her lap, watching the sunrise paint the mountain peaks gold. Each ring of her phone brought a small smile to her lips. The first call had come at 6:30 Sunday morning, Margaret Thornfield, her voice tight with barely controlled panic. "Sarah, we need to discuss this road situation reasonably." "There's nothing to discuss," Sarah had replied calmly. "You declared war. I'm simply responding appropriately." The second call came 20 minutes later, Robert Kemper, trying a different approach. "Look, maybe we were hasty with the chain, but you can't seriously intend to block access to 73 families, watch me." Then David Walsh, attempting to sound legal and threatening, "My attorney says you can't restrict access to a road that's been used by the community for decades. We have established rights. Your attorney is welcome to call my attorney. Her name is Jennifer Blackwood, and she specializes in property rights law. She's been waiting 15 years for you people to give her a reason to destroy you in court." But it was the calls that started after 10 a.m. that really entertained her. Panicked Pine Ridge residents who'd heard rumors and were beginning to understand the implications. The Hendersons, who needed daily access for their daughter's school bus. The Petersons, whose elderly mother required home health care. The Yamadas, who ran a small catering business out of their home and depended on delivery trucks. All of them suddenly very interested in being neighborly to Sarah Mitchell. Now, sipping her coffee as dawn broke over the mountains, she prepared for Phase 2. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a number she didn't recognize. "Ms. Mitchell. This is Charles Westbrook from Westbrook, Martinez and Associates. I represent the Pine Ridge HOA. Mr. Westbrook." Sarah's voice was pleasantly neutral. "How can I help you? I think there's been a misunderstanding about the road access situation. My clients are reasonable people, and I'm sure we can work out an arrangement that benefits everyone." Sarah stood and walked to the edge of her porch, looking down the gravel road that curved through the pines toward the highway. "An arrangement? How interesting. What did you have in mind?" "Well, obviously the community needs continued access. We are prepared to offer compensation for an easement." "Mr. Westbrook, let me stop you right there." Sarah's tone remained conversational, but there was steel underneath. "Your clients spent 15 years harassing me. They tried to force me to renovate my family's cabin to match their suburban aesthetic vision. They've sent me fake fines, threatened legal action, and made every visit to my grandfather's property a battle." Silence on the other end. "And Saturday morning, they physically blocked my access to my own property with a chain and metal posts. They told me the road was closed by HOA order until I submitted to their demands. I understand there were some regrettable actions, Mr. Westbrook. I don't want compensation for an easement. I want something much more valuable." "Which is?" Sarah's smile was arctic. "I want to watch your client squirm." She hung up and immediately dialed her attorney. "Jenny. It's Sarah. Time to execute the plan we discussed." "About damn time." Jennifer Blackwood's voice crackled through the speaker. "I've been reviewing the property records all weekend. Your grandfather was thorough. The road easement is ironclad. No one can challenge your ownership." "Good. File the paperwork this morning. I want no trespassing signs legally posted by noon, and I want the sheriff's department notified that anyone using my road without written permission is trespassing. Consider it done." "What about the community access proposal?" Sarah looked out at the peaceful mountain landscape, imagining 73 families trapped in their expensive homes with no way to reach the outside world except on foot through miles of wilderness. "I'll consider applications on a case-by-case basis. People who've been decent neighbors get access. People who've supported the HOA's harassment campaign She let the sentence hang. And the board members? Margaret, Robert, and David. They can walk. By 11 a.m., Sarah was hammering the last "no trespassing" sign into the ground at the junction where her private road met the state highway. Deputy Martinez of the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office watched with professional interest. "You're really going to shut down access to an entire community?" he asked. "I'm enforcing my property rights," Sarah replied, testing the sign's stability. "If people want to use my road, they can ask permission like civilized human beings instead of trying to steal it. Lot of families up there. Kids who need to get to school, people who work in town." Sarah looked at the deputy evenly. Then maybe they should have thought about that before letting their HOA board declare war on the person who owns their only way out. Deputy Martinez nodded slowly. "Fair enough. Just wanted to make sure you understood the situation." "Oh, I understand it perfectly." Sarah gathered her tools. "The question is whether they do." As if summoned by her words, a convoy of vehicles appeared at the top of the hill, descending toward the highway junction. Sarah counted at least a dozen cars and trucks, led by Margaret Thornfield's white Mercedes SUV. They stopped in a cluster just beyond the new "no trespassing" sign, engines running. Sarah could see faces pressed against windows, phones being held up to record the confrontation. Margaret emerged from her vehicle, flanked by Robert and David. Behind them, Sarah recognized several other Pine Ridge residents, the Carters, the Williamses, the new family who'd moved in last spring and immediately started complaining about property values. "This is insane, Sarah," Margaret called out, her voice carrying across the space between them. "You can't hold an entire community hostage because of a simple misunderstanding." Misunderstanding? Sarah walked closer to the sign, staying carefully on her side of the property line. "You chained off my road and told me I couldn't access my own property. That wasn't a misunderstanding, that was theft." David stepped forward, his expensive hiking boots crunching on gravel. "We are prepared to apologize. The board acted hastily, and we are willing to admit that." "An apology?" Sarah appeared to consider this. "How thoughtful. What else?" "We'll remove you from all future compliance notices," Robert offered desperately. "Your grandfather's cabin is a charming historical. We shouldn't have tried to change it." And Margaret's face was flushed, whether from embarrassment or fury, Sarah couldn't tell. "We'll waive all previous fines. Consider them administrative errors." "Anything else?" The three board members exchanged glances. Behind them, the watching residents were getting restless, engines still running, clearly hoping this confrontation would resolve quickly so they could get to work, school, or wherever Monday morning was taking them. "What do you want?" David finally asked. Sarah smiled. It wasn't a pleasant expression. "I want Margaret Thornfield's resignation from the HOA board. I want Robert Kemper's resignation. And I want David Walsh's resignation." The silence that followed was profound. "You can't be serious," Margaret sputtered. "I'm completely serious. You three decided to escalate this fight beyond reason. Now you can face the consequences. The community won't stand for this." Robert's voice cracked. "You're punishing innocent people." "I'm offering access to innocent people," Sarah interrupted. "Anyone who wants to apply for road access can submit a written request. I'll review each one individually." She looked directly at Margaret. "But the three of you, the ones who made my life hell for 15 years and then tried to steal my property, you're done. Resign from the board, and I'll consider giving you access. Stay on the board, and you can walk to town every day." David's face had gone pale. "My job is in Denver." "That's a 2-hour drive, then you'd better start hiking early." Margaret stepped forward, her composure finally cracking. "This is extortion. Deputy Martinez, arrest her." The deputy, who had been watching the exchange with growing amusement, shook his head. She owns the road. She can restrict access however she wants. That's property rights. But we live here. We have rights." "You have the right to walk," Sarah said pleasantly. It's excellent exercise. She turned and headed back toward her truck, then paused. Oh, and just so everyone's clear, this isn't negotiable. Resign by 5 p.m. today, or start looking into hiking. Boots. As she drove back up her road toward the cabin, Sarah could see the chaos erupting in her rearview mirror. Margaret was shouting at Deputy Martinez, who was clearly explaining that he couldn't arrest someone for exercising their property rights. David was on his phone, probably calling his attorney again. Robert stood frozen, apparently in shock. But it was the other residents that interested her most. The ones who weren't board members, who had been dragged into this fight by their leadership's arrogance. She could see them clustering around their cars, animated conversations breaking out, fingers pointing toward the board members. The revolution was beginning. By evening, Sarah's phone was ringing again. But this time, it wasn't Margaret Thornfield calling to make threats. It was Rebecca Yamada, who lived a quarter-mile up the road from the highway junction. Ms. Mitchell. I know we've never formally met, but I wanted to apologize for the board's behavior. My family moved here. She stood at her kitchen window at 5 a.m. Wednesday morning, staring down the mountain road toward the highway junction where Sarah Mitchell's "No Trespassing" signs gleamed like white tombstones in the pre-dawn darkness. Her perfectly manicured hands trembled around her coffee mug as she watched headlights wind their way up the mountain, delivery trucks, contractors, and service vehicles that were now stopping at those signs and turning around. Her doorbell had been ringing non-stop since Monday. Angry residents demanding explanations. Vendors cancelling services. Her landscaping crew refusing to drive up the mountain without written permission from that Mitchell woman. The Pine Ridge community was under siege, and Margaret was rapidly becoming public enemy number one. You have to do something, her husband Richard muttered from behind his newspaper, his voice heavy with exhaustion. The Hendersons are threatening to sue the HOA. The Petersons say their mother missed her dialysis appointment yesterday because the medical transport wouldn't risk trespassing charges. This is insane. Margaret's reflection in the kitchen window looked haggard, her silver hair unwashed and her expensive silk robe wrinkled from another sleepless night. 3 days ago, she had been the undisputed queen of Pine Ridge, wielding HOA bylaws like a scepter. Now she was trapped in her own kingdom, watching her authority crumble with each car that turned away at Sarah Mitchell's roadblock. She can't sustain this, Margaret said, her voice hoarse. The county will force her to allow emergency access. Public safety laws, she's allowing emergency access, Richard interrupted wearily. Fire department, ambulances, police, they all have written permission. She's playing by every legal rule while slowly strangling us. Margaret's phone buzzed with another text message. She glanced at it and felt her stomach clench. It was from Carol Williams, her closest ally on the HOA board. Margaret, we need to talk. The residents are furious. Some are talking about calling an emergency meeting to remove you from the board. You need to resign before this gets worse. No, Margaret whispered, then louder, no. I've given 15 years of my life to this community. I've maintained property values, enforced standards, kept this place civilized. I will not be driven out by some mountain hermit with a piece of paper. Richard looked up from his newspaper, his expression grim. Margaret, David Walsh already resigned. Robert Kemper sent his resignation letter yesterday afternoon. You're the last one standing, and the community is ready to throw you to the wolves. Margaret turned from the window, her jaw set in a hard line. Then I'll remind them why they elected me in the first place. By 9 a.m., Margaret was dressed in her most authoritative business suit, standing in the Pine Ridge Community Center addressing an emergency meeting she'd called herself. The room was packed with residents, their faces ranging from frustrated to furious. She could feel the hostility radiating from the crowd like heat from a furnace. Ladies and gentlemen, she began, her voice carrying the commanding tone that had served her well for 15 years, we are facing an unprecedented attack on our community's rights and freedoms. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, not all of them supportive. Sarah Mitchell is holding us hostage with an arcane property law that should have been addressed decades ago. But we cannot, we will not, allow one person's vindictive agenda to destroy everything we've built here. Tom Henderson stood up in the third row, his face flushed with anger. Margaret, my daughter missed 2 days of school because the bus won't come up here. This isn't about property rights, this is about you picking a fight you couldn't win. And now my mother's home health aide quit, added Linda Peterson. She says the liability risk of driving on a private road without permission is too high. Mom's been stuck in the house for 3 days. Margaret held up her hands for silence. I understand your frustrations, but we cannot let Sarah Mitchell set the precedent that property owners can hold entire communities hostage. If we surrender to her demands now, what's to stop others from doing the same? Others aren't blocking the only road out of here, shouted Rebecca Yamada from the back of the room. And she's been approving access requests for everyone who asks. Politely. Everyone except you. Because she's trying to force my resignation. Margaret's composure cracked slightly. This isn't about road access, it's about power. She wants to destroy the HOA system that's protected your property values for 15 years. Dr. Sarah Chen, a retired professor who lived near the highway junction, stood up slowly. Margaret, I've lived here for 8 years. I've watched you harass that woman about her grandfather's cabin since the day I moved in. You've sent her threatening letters, imposed fines she didn't owe, and made her life miserable because her rustic cabin didn't match your vision of suburban perfection. The room fell silent. 3 days ago, you and your board physically blocked her access to her own property. You essentially told her she was no longer welcome on land her family has owned for 60 years. Dr. Chen's voice was quiet but carried clearly through the room. And now you're surprised that she's fighting back. Margaret felt the crowd's mood shifting against her like a tide turning. Dr. Chen, the community standards are suggestions, not laws. And they certainly don't give you the right to block someone's driveway. Dr. Chen sat back down. Sarah Mitchell owns that road. She's been graciously allowing us to use it for free for 15 years, and you repaid her generosity by trying to steal it. Applause rippled through the room. Margaret felt panic rising in her chest. I call for a vote of no confidence in Margaret Thornfield's leadership, Dr. Chen announced. And a formal resolution requiring her immediate resignation. Seconded came voices from multiple directions. This is not a legal meeting. Margaret protested. You can't actually, we can, interrupted Carol Williams, rising from her seat in the front row. Article 7 of the HOA bylaws allows for emergency board removal in cases of, let me quote directly, actions that substantially harm the community or its members. Margaret stared at her former ally in shock. Carol, you can't be serious. 47 households can't get basic services. 3 families have missed work. 2 elderly residents haven't received medical care. And all because you decided to pick a fight with someone who held all the cards. Carol's voice was steady and implacable. You did this, Margaret. And now you need to fix it. The vote was swift and merciless, 68 in favor of Margaret's removal, 3 opposed, 2 abstaining. Margaret stood frozen at the podium as the results were announced, the weight of her complete defeat settling around her like a shroud. 15 years of leadership, authority, and respect, gone in 10 minutes. The board will send Sarah Mitchell a formal apology and request for road access, Carol announced, having seamlessly taken control of the meeting. Margaret, you have until 5 p.m. today to submit your resignation, or we'll file formal charges with the county for abuse of authority. Margaret drove home in stunned silence, her hands shaking on the steering wheel. The familiar mountain landscape looked different now, hostile, foreign, like enemy territory. Her phone buzzed constantly with text messages she didn't want to read, voicemails she couldn't bear to hear. By noon, she was sitting in her home office, staring at a blank resignation letter on her computer screen. The cursor blinked mockingly, waiting for her to type the words that would end her reign over Pine Ridge. Her phone rang. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize. Mrs. Thornfield. This is Jennifer Blackwood, Sarah Mitchell's attorney. Margaret's blood turned to ice. What do you want? I wanted to inform you that Ms. Mitchell has received numerous access requests from Pine Ridge residents over the past 3 days. She's approved every single one. Except mine. That's correct. However, she's instructed me to inform you that she's prepared to approve your access request as well, under one condition. Margaret closed her eyes. Which is a formal, written apology. Not just for blocking her road, but for 15 years of harassment, fake fines, and attempts to force her to alter her grandfather's cabin. She wants acknowledgement of the wrongs committed and a promise that such behavior will never be repeated. The lawyer's voice was professionally neutral, but Margaret could hear the satisfaction underneath. She's also prepared to accept your resignation from the HOA board as sufficient resolution to avoid any legal action for trespassing and property rights violations. Margaret stared out her office window at the mountain vista she'd called home for 2 decades. In the distance, she could see the roof of Sarah Mitchell's cabin through the trees, that rustic structure that had been the source of so much conflict. And if you refuse, then you'll be walking to town for the rest of your life. Ms. Mitchell owns that road, Mrs. Thornfield. Every inch of it. And after what you and your board did, she has no obligation to grant you access. After the lawyer hung up, Margaret sat in silence for a long time. Outside her window, she watched a delivery truck stop at the highway junction, then continue up the mountain after showing papers to someone she couldn't see. Life in Pine Ridge was returning to normal for everyone except her. Her computer screen still showed the blank resignation letter, cursor blinking patiently. At 4:47 p.m., Margaret Thornfield typed 7 words that ended her 15. 3 weeks after Margaret Thornfield's resignation, Sarah Mitchell was having the best morning of her life. She sat on her cabin's front porch with her second cup of coffee, watching the sunrise paint the mountain peaks in shades of gold and crimson. The familiar sounds of the awakening forest surrounded her, birds calling, squirrels chattering, the distant sound of the creek that ran behind her property. But there was something new in the morning symphony, silence where there used to be hostility. For the first time in 15 years, she could enjoy her grandfather's cabin without the weight of impending harassment, threatening letters, or HOA board members lurking in the trees to document violations. Her phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it and smiled. Ms. Mitchell, this is Rebecca Yamada. I'm catering the community barbecue this Saturday and wondered if you'd like to join us. The whole neighborhood would love to meet you properly. Rebecca, Sarah typed back, I'd be honored. What can I bring? The response came immediately, just yourself. Though if you have any stories about your grandfather building the cabin, people would love to hear them. See you at 2 p.m. Sarah set her phone aside and looked down the gravel road that had been the source of so much conflict. It looked exactly the same as it had a month ago, the same curves through the pine trees, the same potholes that needed filling before winter, the same mountain views that took her breath away. But everything had changed. The no trespassing signs were still posted, but now they served a different purpose. Instead of blocking access, they reminded everyone that they were guests on her property, traveling by her grace and goodwill. The subtle shift in power dynamics had transformed the entire relationship between Sarah and the Pine Ridge community. Her laptop chimed with an email notification. She opened it and found a message from Jennifer Blackwood, her attorney. Sarah, thought you'd find this interesting. The HOA has formally voted to dissolve the Architectural Review Committee and eliminate all cabin design requirements. They've also voted to rename the community road in honor of your grandfather. The new signs will read Mitchell Family Road. Congratulations, you didn't just win the war, you changed the entire culture. Jenny. Sarah stared at the email, feeling a complex mix of emotions. Victory, certainly, but also something deeper. Her grandfather had built his cabin in these mountains to find peace and solitude, never imagining that 60 years later his granddaughter would have to fight for the right to preserve his legacy. But perhaps this was exactly what he would have wanted, not just the preservation of his cabin, but the transformation of conflict into community. Another email arrived, this one from an address she didn't recognize, thornfield.margaret@email.com. Sarah hesitated, then opened it. Dear Sarah, I know I have no right to contact you after everything that happened, but I wanted to share something I discovered while cleaning out my HOA files. 3 months ago, a developer contacted me about purchasing several Pine Ridge properties, including yours. They were particularly interested in your lot because of its proximity to the creek and the mature trees. When I told them your cabin wasn't for sale, they suggested that increasing HOA pressure might convince you to sell. I want you to know that I didn't take their money or make any formal agreement. But I realize now that their suggestion influenced my decisions regarding your property. The increased enforcement, the road blockade, none of it would have happened without their manipulation. This doesn't excuse my behavior or make up for 15 years of harassment. But I thought you deserved to know that there were forces at work beyond simple neighborhood politics. I'm moving to Denver next month to live with my sister. Pine Ridge hasn't felt like home since the community meeting. Perhaps that's appropriate. I'm genuinely sorry for everything I put you through. Your grandfather's cabin is beautiful exactly as it is. Margaret Thornfield. Sarah read the email twice, processing this final revelation. A developer, working behind the scenes, manipulating community tensions to pressure her into selling. It explained the escalation in harassment over the past few months, the sudden urgency in Margaret's demands for compliance. She forwarded the email to Jennifer Blackwood with a note, "Jenny, looks like we have a new target. Can you find out which developer and what other properties they are targeting? This smells like a conspiracy." Her phone rang almost immediately. "Sarah, it's Jenny. I just read Margaret's email. This is huge." "How huge?" "If we can prove a developer was manipulating HOA actions to force property sales, we're looking at conspiracy charges, possible RICO violations, and enough civil damages to bankrupt whoever's behind it." Sarah walked to the edge of her porch, looking out over the forest that surrounded her cabin. "What do you need from me?" "Permission to investigate. This could get messy, and it might drag you into a much bigger legal battle than what you just finished." Sarah thought about her grandfather, building this cabin with his own hands, creating a sanctuary in the mountains where his family could find peace for generations. Then she thought about other families facing similar pressure, other communities being manipulated by developers who saw natural beauty as nothing more than profit margins. "Do it," she said. "But Jenny, I want full transparency. Any Pine Ridge residents who were manipulated by this developer deserve to know the truth. Even Margaret Thornfield." Sarah looked at the email again, reading between the lines of Margaret's confession and apology. Especially Margaret Thornfield. She may have been awful to me, but she was a pawn in someone else's game. After hanging up, Sarah poured herself another cup of coffee and settled back into her porch chair. Below her, the mountain road curved peacefully through the trees, no longer a battleground but simply a path home. Her phone buzzed with another text, this one from a number she didn't recognize. "Ms. Mitchell, this is Tom Henderson. I wanted to thank you for approving our access so quickly last week. My daughter hasn't missed school since. But I also wanted to ask, would you be interested in joining the new HOA board? After everything that happened, we need someone who actually understands property rights. The community would be honored to have you." Sarah stared at the message. For a long time, 3 weeks ago, she had been the enemy, the outsider, the stubborn hermit who wouldn't conform to community standards. Now they wanted her to lead the very organization that had tormented her for 15 years. She typed back, "Thanks for the offer, Tom. Let me think about it." But even as she sent the message, she knew her answer. She had spent 15 years fighting the HOA's attempts to control her property and her choices. She wasn't about to join them now, even in victory. Instead, she had a better idea. She opened her laptop and began typing a new email to the Pine Ridge community mailing list. "Dear neighbors, thank you for the invitation to join the HOA board. I'm honored by your trust, but I believe the events of the past month have shown us something important. Communities work best when they are built on mutual respect rather than bureaucratic control. Instead of rebuilding the same system that caused so much conflict, I'd like to propose something different. What if we simply agreed to be good neighbors? What if we trusted each other to maintain our properties responsibly without the need for architectural committees and compliance enforcement? What if we focused on building community instead of enforcing conformity? I'll continue to allow road access to anyone who asked respectfully. In return, I hope you'll continue to be the kind of neighbors who make this mountain a wonderful place to live." My grandfather built his cabin here in 1962 because he believed the mountains could teach us to live simply and peacefully. I think he was right. Let's prove it together. Sarah Mitchell. She hit send and leaned back in her chair, watching the sun climb higher over the peaks. Somewhere in the distance, she could hear the sound of children laughing, neighbors calling to each other, the ordinary sounds of a community going about its daily life. For the first time in 15 years, Pine Ridge felt like the peaceful mountain sanctuary her grandfather had envisioned. But Sarah's victory was about to reveal an enemy far more dangerous than a small-town HOA board. And this new fight would test not just her resolve, but her ability to protect an entire community from forces that saw their mountain paradise as nothing more than a real estate opportunity waiting to be exploited.